everyone, this is Group A, and today we'll be presenting on Chapter 4, Coactive Persuasion. My name is Tiffany.
I'm Talia.
I'm Abby.
I'm Keegan.
I'm Grace.
And I'm Kyla.
And now, Abby will talk about what coactive persuasion is.
Okay, so Chapter 4 focuses on coactive persuasion. So what is coactive persuasion? According to Persuasion in Society, coactive persuasion is an umbrella term used for the ways that persuaders work towards persuadees psychologically so that they will be moved to accept the persuader's position or proposal for action. So this is an outline of Chapter 4, and these are all the sections we're going to be going over and talking about in the presentation today. So they are using receiver-oriented approaches, being situation-sensitive, combining similarity and credibility, building on acceptable premises, appearing reasonable and providing psychological support, and using communication resources. So starting off with the using receiver-oriented approaches, coactive persuasion uses a receiver-oriented approach rather than a topic-oriented approach. The receiver-oriented approach assumes that all the receivers are different or unique and learns from these receivers what they want, need, value, know, etc. This approach selects definitive goals according to how ready the receiver is to be persuaded and communicates these messages in a mutual exchange. Next is being situation sensitive. Situations can vary, which means that something can be persuasive in one context, but then ineffective in another. There are three situational variables, which are emotional commitment, time, and audience expectations. The amount of emotional commitment involved is important because we must see how invested our receiver is in a particular situation. Time is another important variable because how much time the receiver has to process the message has an impact on whether they'll be persuaded or not. The last variable is audience expectations, which is when the persuaders need to know what is expected or required of them in different situations. Next is combining similarity and credibility. Coactive persuaders establish relational bonds with their audience by expressing interest and caring for their audiences. Evidence for interpersonal similarity is essential to coactive persuaders. Interpersonal similarity usually results in attraction to the persuader, but doesn't always show credibility. There are two big factors in determining a persuader's credibility, which are perceived expertise and trustworthiness. Personal credibility is important to establish trust with an audience. The message needs to have internal credibility, which is the details that are memorable. And now Grace is going to continue with building on acceptable premises.
Another strategy a coactive persuader uses is building on acceptable premises. There are different approaches to conflict, such as the objectivist approach, the privatist approach, and the combative approach. In the objectivist approach, the persuader operates from what he perceives as greater knowledge or wisdom. If the persuader attempts to demonstrate this, it is known as a sage on the stage method. The privatist approach expresses antipathy towards persuasion and doesn't offer support for the persuader's feelings. Combative approaches are ridiculing and more coercion than coactive persuasion. Despite all these approaches, coactive persuaders prefer inducements over coercion. They focus more on winning belief rather than winning the argument. A coactive persuader believes that if the persuadee agrees with the premise, then they are halfway to agreeing to the conclusion. These premise hooks and common ground appeals help create an identity with the audience, as well as assent by using yes, yes, and yes, but techniques. The fifth strategy of coactive persuasion is appearing reasonable and providing psychological support. Emotion provides a hook to attend to a message. Coactive persuaders must provide the audience with a feeling for problems, but audiences often need incentives to act. They need to be convinced that proposals for actions will help them, whether it be through acquisition, protection, relief, or prevention. In order to persuade the audience that they will be benefited, a coactive persuader can use several steps. They can link their position with beliefs already held by the audience, show the audience that the proposal has the support of the people whom the audience admires, and simplify the message. The persuader should anticipate and respond to possible objections and also encourage issue involvement for people whose opinions will matter. A coactive persuader can also reinforce desired responses and withhold reinforcements for undesired responses, take advantage of the tendency of persuadees to form conscious or unconscious associations, and encourage role-playing desired behavior. The message includes what is said verbally and non-verbally. Even the smallest utterance or body movement sends a message to the receiver. The term resources of ambiguity means that there are multiple ways to label something. We can categorize, define, illustrate, compare, contrast, or contextualize. By labeling, we can intensify or downplay the way we communicate something. For example, if you called your boss a pig, roach, or worm for hitting on one of your coworkers, you'd be intensifying. If you called him an old goat and brushed it off in the same scenario, you'd be downplaying. The message also involves surroundings. Think about the difference between a lecture in a huge lecture hall versus one in close physical surroundings. Oftentimes, these can change the way we receive a message. Choice of medium is also another communication resource. The medium is the carrier of the message. Despite changing media, we are still drawing human connection. As coactive persuaders, we must select the best media or work within media constraints effectively. It is important to keep these communication resources in mind. When we actively use them as coactive persuaders, mutual and human interaction takes place. Now on to Talia to talk about our peer-reviewed article.
Okay, so the peer-reviewed scholarly article we found to represent our chapter was The Effectiveness of Empathy versus Fear-Arousing Anti-Smoking PSAs by Lijiang Shen. And this involves the effectiveness of using fear and empathy in advertisements. In this specific article, the authors investigate the effectiveness of fear versus empathy arousing, specifically anti-smoking PSAs, and examine the roles of message-induced fear and state empathy in persuasion. The authors wanted to determine which of the three messages between empathy, fear versus the control the participants were most persuaded by. This is important, especially in advertisements when trying to draw in the audience through the type of message. And now Kyla can talk about the design of the experiment.
So the goal of the experiment was to explore the related effectiveness between fear and empathy in anti-smoking PSAs, as well as better understand message-induced fear and empathy in their roles of persuasion. So the participants were 260 college students, and they were all enrolled at the University of Georgia. 87 of them were male and 120 of them were female. And the sample was overwhelmingly white. So the participants were assigned to groups, either being the group viewing empathy ads or fear-arousing ads, as well as a control group. And they each watched 4 different PSAs in their groups. And then after each of the 4 videos, the students reported their emotional responses, as well as any other additional feelings they had. And then after that, they rated the message sensation value of the PSA. And then Talia is going to go on to talk about the conclusion of the experiment.
So in conclusion, while both fear and state empathy were found to have had a positive direct effect on the persuasion of the experimenters, fear also had a negative indirect impact on persuasion by activating a psychological resistance. And now Tiffany and Keegan will talk about the real world application.
Based off the chapter, coercive persuasion could take place in everyday life. For example, you can find it in the workplace, politics, debates, retail, and parenting. Things you want to consider while using coercive persuasion. As a persuader, you want to try to put yourself in the receiver's shoes. For example, as we mentioned earlier, you want to have a receiver-oriented approach. You want to know your audience or your receiver's wants and needs. Some factors to consider is that there's a certain window or time that the receiver has to process the message, or there's emotional commitment, like how willing is your receiver to be persuaded, and audience expectations, basically like what is expected of you as a persuader. Now Tiffany will share a few examples.
So a very common and popular technique that brands and companies use in order to persuade their audience is through celebrity endorsements. So since celebrities are admired by the masses and people look up to them, by sponsoring these celebrities to be the face of your brand or company will attract people's attention and persuade people to want to either invest in your company or support your company. So for example, Weight Watchers is a program that helps curate
individualized weight loss plans for anyone who wants to lose weight. And Oprah Winfrey has been the face of this company since 2015. She's invested a lot in this company, and since a lot of people know Oprah Winfrey, watch her show, are huge fans of her, they might see Oprah Winfrey on the front page of Weight Watchers and be like, oh, like I should lose weight, and I should work with this company to kind of help me lose weight. So another technique that, next page. So in the study we used, it talks about how effective using empathy or fear is in getting people to stop smoking through the anti-smoking PSAs. So a very popular technique that is used in coactive persuasion is using emotional appeals. So a lot of commercials use emotional appeals to incite feelings of anger, sadness, empathy, or like humor in people when they're watching it, to try and get them to buy their products or invest in their company. So for example, this commercial was released in 2015. It's called My Dad is a Liar by MetLife Insurance, which is an insurance company in Thailand, and it became extremely popular among everyone who watched it because it was able to make people cry by being empathetic towards this dad who is trying very hard to make a living for both him and his daughter. Yeah, so now let's watch the video.
Daddy is the sweetest daddy in the world. Daddy is the most handsome, the smartest, the most clever, the kindest. He is my Superman. Daddy wants me to do well at school. Daddy is just great, but he lies. He lies about having a job. He lies about having money. He lies that he's not tired. He lies that he's not hungry.
What's he doing?
He lies that we have everything. He lies about his happiness. He lies because of me.
So through the commercial, well, hopefully you felt sad and empathetic towards the father. He was lying towards his daughter to prevent her from knowing that in reality they're actually very poor and he's struggling to make a living for both of them. And because viewers will feel sad and not relate but feel empathetic towards the father, they would want to you know invest and buy life insurance with this company. So this is an example of using emotional appeals in commercials. And the second commercial is a Nike commercial that Keegan will talk about.
On a more motivational and inspirational note, this is a Nike Find Your Greatness, and you could go ahead and play the video.
Greatness. It's just something we made up. Somehow we've come to believe that greatness is a gift, reserved for a chosen few. For prodigy, for superstars. And the rest of us can only stand by watching. You can forget that. Greatness is not some rare DNA strand. It's not some precious thing. Greatness is no more unique to us than breathing. We're all capable of it. All of us.
So in this campaign, Nike targets all athletes around the world. This campaign uses cognitive dissonance and a belief objective to motivate their athletes, because the average person believes that there's only a select few people that are supposed to be great. Those with God-given talent are supposed to be great. Those with all the resources are supposed to be great. But Nike wants all athletes, no matter how big, how small, how fast, or how slow, to believe that they all have the ability to be great within themselves. That's it.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it.